Ethan Miller stood frozen on the wooden porch of the Ohio house. Paint, talk about the FEELINGS ear of the LIKE. The show itself was warning him to run. What disturbed him most wasn't the house's age, but the way the tall grass around it seemed untouched not just by people, but by life. Rachel squeezed his hand and said it felt perfect, finally a home they could afford after years of struggle in Chicago. The realtor, Mrs. Carter, smiled far too wide and spoke too softly, offering keys without paperwork, saying everything was ready for them, just sign and move in, no waiting. Ethan asked why the price was so low, and she answered, "Some homes want to be lived in." Inside, the air was colder. Their footsteps echoed strangely, as if another set followed behind. The walls whispered with drafts, carrying words Ethan almost understood. That night, Rachel swore she heard footsteps upstairs, slow and heavy, even though every room was empty. When they asked Mrs. Carter about neighbors, she said the town kept to itself, then warned them, once a week, the house must remain open to visitors. Ethan laughed, thinking it was a joke. Rachel didn't. Ethan paced the living room, unable to ignore the dread pressing on his chest, because it was time for the first open house. He expected friendly neighbors, curious locals, maybe buyers, but instead 8 strangers walked through the front door silently. Every face was pale, eyes hollow, mouths slightly open like they were breathing through their teeth. None greeted Ethan or Rachel. They drifted room to room, examining walls, touching furniture, staring at family photos, though the couple had lived there only a week and barely owned anything. Rachel whispered to Ethan that she felt watched, that something inside her chest twisted every time one of the strangers stared at her. Ethan approached one visitor, a tall man in a black coat, but before Ethan could speak, the man leaned close and whispered, "You shouldn't have come here." His breath felt cold, like winter wind against Ethan's ear. When the open house time ended, the strangers walked out in silence, one by one, disappearing into the road. Ethan shut the door, sighing with relief, but Rachel gasped, pointing upstairs. One visitor, a woman in a long gray dress, was still standing at the top of the stairs, staring down at them with eyes that did not blink. Rachel stood at the foot of the stairs, whispering Ethan's name like she was trapped between fear and disbelief. The woman at the top didn't move. She didn't speak. She stared, and Ethan felt his body tense with instinct to run. Before he could react, the woman turned slowly and walked down the hallway, vanishing into shadows. Ethan chased her, flicking on lights, opening doors, checking closets, but she was gone. Rachel wanted to call police, but Ethan couldn't explain what happened without sounding insane. The next morning, Ethan noticed something new. A locked basement door behind the kitchen pantry that he swore wasn't there when they moved in. It was chained tightly, sealed with rusted metal, as if someone wanted to keep something in. He asked Mrs. Carter about it, and she froze, then smiled without blinking and said, "You don't need the basement." That night, Rachel found a small box stuffed under the hallway floorboards, filled with newspaper clippings. Every family who lived there vanished, their belongings left behind, their bodies never found. The photos of the families looked peaceful at first glance, until Ethan noticed each family portrait contained a pale face hiding behind them, just slightly out of focus. The house began to breathe around them. Walls groaned at night, floors creaked even when Rachel and Ethan slept perfectly still. Outside, local children gathered across the street, daring each other to run past the home. None ever crossed the fence line. Rachel woke Ethan at 3:15 a.m., shaking him violently, whispering that someone was watching them through the window. Ethan stumbled to the living room, and every window was fogged on the outside. In the center of each pane, a pale face pressed against the glass, eyes open wide, mouths smiling unnaturally. Rachel screamed, and Ethan grabbed his phone, recording everything. But the moment lights turned on, the faces vanished, leaving clean glass. Police arrived, checking the footage, but the video showed nothing, only empty windows. Rachel began refusing to sleep. Shadows crawled under her door. She swore she heard footsteps pacing the hallway at night, heavy and deliberate. Ethan grew exhausted trying to comfort her, but he knew she wasn't imagining it, because at dawn they found footprints leading from the window to their bedroom door. Wet footprints belonging to bare, human feet. Ethan decided to unlock the basement door, convinced answers waited below. The basement air tasted like rust, mold, and death. Ethan held a flashlight that flickered every few seconds, revealing walls covered in child-size handprints. Rachel gagged at the stench. Something wet dripped from the ceiling, landing on her shoulder, and when she wiped her fingers, the substance was thick and red. Ethan whispered that maybe a water pipe burst, but both of them knew it wasn't water. In the back wall, a wooden door waited behind broken shelves. Carved into its surface were words burned into the wood, "Do not open." Rachel begged Ethan not to touch it, but he felt drawn to it, as if the house commanded him. When he reached for the knob, the entire basement shook. A low growl rumbled through the room, vibrating their bones. Rachel screamed for him to stop, but Ethan opened the door. Inside was a narrow hallway leading deeper underground. His flashlight flickered, showing shapes crawling along the walls, whispering Ethan's name. Suddenly, the hallway lights burst to life, blinding them. A scream echoed through the entire house, high, pitched and human. Upstairs, every light went out, plunging the house into total darkness. Ethan heard footsteps running toward them below. Mrs. Carter arrived at dawn, knocking calmly on the front door like nothing unusual had happened. Ethan's eyes were bloodshot, Rachel trembling violently, both refusing to speak of the screams from below. Mrs. Carter entered without permission, walked straight to the living room, and sat with folded hands. She explained the truth, voice steady, expression empty. The house was not for sale, not truly. It chose people. It took people. Every family before them had disappeared because the house demanded owners, demanded loyalty, demanded souls. Ethan demanded to know why they weren't warned. She said no one leaves freely. The open house events weren't for show. They were sacrifices, replacements, potential residents to feed the house so owners could survive a little longer. Ethan shouted that they were leaving, but Rachel's face changed. She stared at Mrs. Carter not with fear, but with cold curiosity. Mrs. Carter smiled gently and whispered to Rachel, "The house likes you." Ethan grabbed Rachel's arm, begging her to leave, but she pulled away and walked upstairs without a word. That night she slept peacefully for the first time, while Ethan lay awake listening to whispering voices beneath their floor, calling his name. Rachel spent mornings standing alone in the hallway, staring at blank walls as if expecting someone to appear. Ethan asked what she was doing, and she answered softly, talking to them. Her voice was unfamiliar, distant, hollow. She stopped eating with Ethan. She stopped laughing. At night, he heard scratching beneath their bed, rhythmic and relentless, like nails carving wood. Rachel didn't react. She whispered that the house wanted him to accept it, to trust it, to surrender. Ethan snapped, grabbing car keys, insisting they leave, but the front door refused to open. Every window jammed shut. Phones died. The house hummed with warm vibration, like a living organ pulsing. Rachel stood at the staircase, smiling faintly. She told Ethan the house promised her protection, that she was chosen, that Ethan needed to obey. He planned to burn the house down, convinced fire would end everything, but when he carried gasoline into the kitchen, the walls bled thick red liquid. Words appeared in dripping streaks. "She stays." Ethan collapsed to his knees, sobbing, realizing Rachel was already gone, her soul swallowed by the home. Ethan opened the front door, screaming into the empty street for help, but the entire town watched from porches, silent and still. Not one person moved to save him. Rachel stood beside him, smiling softly, whispering that the final open house must begin. Ethan begged her to run, to fight, to wake up. But Rachel only tilted her head and whispered, "You were never meant to stay." The door burst open, and dozens of strangers stepped inside, eyes vacant, faces blank, walking past Ethan as if he were invisible. Rachel welcomed them warmly. Ethan backed away, heart pounding, tripping over the stairs. The walls shook. The house roared. Human-shaped shadows crawled across the floor, reaching for Ethan's legs. He screamed Rachel's name, but she didn't turn. The floor opened beneath him, swallowing his body into darkness. His last sight was Rachel's calm face. The next morning, Rachel stood on the porch alone as police wrote Ethan off as missing. Mrs. Carter placed a new sign in the yard, "Open house today." Rachel watched calmly as another family parked in the driveway, smiling at the low price, unaware of the screams buried beneath the floor. The cycle had begun again.